Hi, it's Kevin Bates here. So I'm going to go into futurist mode by starting with looking at meetings I used to go to at Citrix Systems back in 1998-99, where we would discuss what we then called ubiquitous computing and what is now evolved into what's called IoT, the Internet of Things. And back then we were talking about what the world would be like if every device had a computer in it and was connected to a network and they could all talk to each other. When it was all vague concepts because the technology wasn't really there, but the ideas were. And IoT, of course, is incredibly hot at the moment. I just read a story about how, for example, Masayoshi Son went about acquiring ARM, including a rather strange flight of the CEO off to Turkey to wrap up the deal in a very, very short time. So if investors with the kind of money that Sun has are snapping up companies that are going to enable IoT, then I would guess that indeed it is going to be a very big thing. However, thinking beyond just devices connected to the internet or to networks being able to send data and receive commands, these devices, I think, are going to end up becoming more and more autonomous. We've already got autonomous cars on the horizon, and one of the things that I personally can't help but think is inevitable is trading. The fact is that money is the lubricant of sort of society, makes everything run. Money makes the world go round, and when you have a world with billions of devices all trying to interact with each other, I think at some stage they're going to have to trade. One device is going to have something that another device holds, and it's either going to want to access services from the device or it's going to want data. And this would all work very well if they are all stuck on effectively the same LAN and all owned by the same entity, but in practice, of course, that's not going to be the case. There's going to be lots of different manufacturers and they're going to be using lots of different platforms. And those platforms are not necessarily going to interact perfectly. Now, I know there's a desire in big companies to have walled gardens because it gives you more control, it gives you more capability to extract profit from the system. But in practice, we always fragment. We always end up with different pools and areas of control. And if you look back to the early computer networks, it was all LAN-based, and it was really only with the advent of the internet and wide area networks and the possibility of different LANs to interact that real value started to be created at a tremendous rate. So I see the same problem arising in IoT when it comes to breaching these individual walled areas or LANs and building a true Internet of Things. And so if you combine a true Internet of Things with a need for trading, there needs to be some kind of medium of exchange that transcends all these different closed ecosystems. And of course, as a blockchain enthusiast, I'm immediately going to say blockchain and cryptocurrency, but I fail to see any other really good, viable, decentralized system. And it does need to be decentralized because there isn't going to be one entity in charge, probably, who would want to hand off control of such a valuable resource to one entity and pay heavy fees for the service. So that's why I think blockchain and IoT are going to eventually mesh in a very substantial and fundamental way. That blockchain is basically going to provide the underlying trading platform for different IoT ecosystems to be able to interact properly and to provide each other with a maximum level of value. And I do believe that ultimately that's going to be done autonomously, and of course for that you need some kind of programmable exchange medium or programmable money and smart contracts and things like that in order to allow that to function properly and to its most efficient extent. So that's a video on why I think blockchain and IoT are ultimately going to pair together very, very well, and there will come a point where we look back and say, well, that was natural, of course that was the way it's going to be. It's just not obvious at the moment because we're still in the very early days. Hope you found that interesting. Leave a comment below if you have anything you'd like to say about this. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. I like either kind of comment. And I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye for now.